Well, our conference is almost drawing to a close. We hope you've enjoyed it so far. Thank you much. Well, as some people say, either we saved the best for last, or we're batting cleanup, or he was hoping everyone would go home first before he speaks. I'm not sure. But we're pleased to have Daniel C. Peterson as one of our speakers. A native of Southern California, Dan Peterson received a bachelor's degree in Greek and philosophy from Brigham Young University and earned his PhD in Near Eastern language and cultures from the University of California at Los Angeles, that's UCLA. Dr. Peterson is a professor of Islamic Studies and Arabic at BYU, as well as a member of the board and associate executive director of its Institute for the Study and Preservation of Ancient Religious Texts. He is the executive editor of BYU's three-part Middle Eastern Text Initiative. The series in this initiative published dual language editions of the classical works of medieval Arabic and Persian philosophy, Arabic medicine and science, and early Coptic, Syriac, and Christian Arabic literature. It's through the University of Chicago Press. They distribute these volumes. He is the author of several books and numerous articles on Islamic and Latter-day Saint topics, including most recently a biography of the Prophet Muhammad. Dr. Peterson served in the Switzerland Zurich mission and for approximately 8 years on the Gospel Doctrine Writing Committee for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He currently serves as Gospel Doctrine teacher in his home ward. He is immediate past chairman of the Board of Trustees for the Foundation of Ancient Research Mormon Studies Farms and edits the Farms Review of Books. He's married to the former Deborah Stevens of Lakewood, Colorado, and they're the parents of 3 sons. You may have noticed that he's been the point of several jokes and comments. That's because Dan has a good sense of humor, and so we appreciate that sense of humor that he's got. And so with that, we welcome Dan Peterson.
Well, I've heard the metaphors of batting cleanup and all that sort of thing. It sort of reminds me of Mighty Casey at the bat. With all that entails. I've been urged by a number of people to say something to get even with Bill Hamblin. However, I will not lower myself to the level. His habitual dwelling place. I'm not going to do that. Actually, welcome to part 2 of this afternoon's infomercial for books by Bill Hamblin. Professor Seeley and I are honored to be on his marketing team. I'm going to be talking about a work in progress that Bill and I are working on right now, entitled God and Mr. Hitchens, Empty Rhetoric, Skewed History, and the New Atheism. We're looking for a publisher. We have several leads on this. We're hoping to do this quickly and get it out. Let me explain who Mr. Hitchens is. Christopher Hitchens is the fourth of what you might call the 4 horsemen of the New Atheism. Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and now Christopher Hitchens. And he is the author of a book that's been on the bestseller list recently called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And you may notice if you see it that God in God is Not Great is not capitalized. That's sort of emblematic of the very serious and mature approach that he takes to the subject. Some of you have seen Christopher Hitchens on television, I suppose, where he's been a presence for quite some time now as a commentator on politics. He's a British writer who just took U.S. citizenship this past year, just a few months ago, and has appeared recently as a defender of the war in Iraq and the war against terror. It actually makes me somewhat nervous because I'm wondering, having read his book now twice and given some thought to his positions, as to what his motivation is for that. Is it really defense of freedom, or is it just disdain for religion, which is a very, very powerful force in his life. Notice the subtitle of the book again, How Religion Poisons Everything. You may have seen him on television back in the month of May when Jerry Falwell died. He became notorious for what he said then and what he said in a number of venues. This is what he said in Slate magazine. The discovery of the carcass of Jerry Falwell on the floor of an obscure office in Virginia has almost zero significance, except perhaps for 2 categories of the species labeled credulous idiot. Like many fanatical preachers, Falwell was especially disgusting and exuding an almost sexless personality while railing from dawn to dusk about the sex lives of others. His obsession with homosexuality was on a par with his lip-smacking evocations of hellfire. From his wobbly base of opportunist fundraising and degree mill money spinning in Lynchburg, Virginia, he set out to puddle his sausage-sized fingers into the intimate arrangements of people who had done no harm. It's a shame that there is no hell for Falwell to go to, and it's extraordinary that not even such a scandalous career as his is enough to shake our dumb addiction to the faith-based. It's not the usual kind of obituary. Now, he's famous for also despising Billy Graham, Mahatma Gandhi, and at book length, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. On the other hand, he's not a total misanthrope. He's described Lenin as a great man. He still reveres Leon Trotsky. But God is Not Great is explicitly contemptuous of religious believers at excruciating detail. He despises Jerry Falwell for his crimes, but as I say, admires Leon Trotsky, who was famous for saying, among other things, that we needed to get beyond the Quaker papist babble about the sanctity of life. And Trotsky put that into force, as with Lenin, he was the co-architect of the Gulag in the Soviet Union, leading to the deaths of potentially as many as 40 million people. Now, some of you may be interested to know that one of the exhibits in Hitchens' case against religion is Mormonism. He has a short and not very well-informed section about Mormonism in his book. He describes Mormonism, and this language is fairly typical of the way he approaches religion altogether, as a ridiculous cult. He says, the actual story of the impostor is almost embarrassing to read and almost embarrassingly easy to uncover. Now, he's gone to a great deal of effort to uncover it by studying the work of Fawn Brodie. The story, he says, has been best told by Dr. Fawn Brodie, whose 1945 book, No Man Knows My History, was a good faith attempt by a professional historian to put the kindest possible interpretation on the relevant events. Now, this is also typical of his approach. She becomes Dr. Fawn Brodie. In fact, she never had a doctorate. He does this consistently. The most obscure atheist emerges as the great so-and-so, the illustrious so-and-so, where the greatest theists, Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, all are depicted as complete clueless idiots. I'm fond in particular of contrasting Dr. Fawn Brodie, who did not have a doctorate, with Mr. William Albright of Baltimore, who was considered by many the leading archaeologist, leading Old Testament scholar of the 20th century. And yet he's just Mr. William Albright of Baltimore. He happened to teach at Johns Hopkins and found the tradition of biblical studies there. But it doesn't count because he was some sort of believer. Mormonism shows, quote, what happens when a plain racket turns into a serious religion before our eyes. Joseph Smith was a gifted opportunist whose cleverness was to unite cupidity with half-baked anthropology. Joseph Smith modeled himself on Muhammad. I found that interesting. I recently published a biography on Muhammad, and I hadn't noticed. Here's another one I liked. Smith refused to show the golden plates to anybody, claiming that for other eyes to view them would mean death. No mention of the witnesses because he probably doesn't know about them. The Book of Mormon is a piece of vulgar fabrication. But you learn a lot from his book about the Book of Mormon. You learn about Nephi, the son of Lehi. The made-up Battle of Cumorah, misspelled. And then here's one I like too, meticulous research all the way through this book. And I'm using his approach to Mormonism as an illustration sort of in microcosm of the way he generally approaches the whole issue of religion. Speaking of the policy on priesthood and blacks and the Mormons, they had still another revelation, quote unquote, and more or less in time for the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, had it divinely disclosed to them that black people were human after all. Now, apart from the slightly misstated theological content of the revelation, I think we knew they were human. I'm puzzled by how he actually got the date of 1965. He explains early on that his methodology consists chiefly in using Google. That's his research technique. But even on Google, I think they have the date right, and there's no ambiguity about it. This is not a debated or obscure historical issue. June of 1978 is not all that close to the Civil Rights Act of 1965, but it fits his thesis to argue that it was connected with the Civil Rights Act And then here's this description of baptism for the dead, also carefully researched. Every week, at special ceremonies in Mormon temples,